Hello there and welcome to another edition of Wrong Ways Columbia Cast with Brendan Wrongway Corrigan. Now, in a country with such vast economic inequality, those of us who come to Colombia often feel there is little we can do to make a difference. Indeed, there's a belief in some quarters that trying to help is a pointless exercise given the endemic corruption in all walks of life here. However, there are others who have gone selflessly to exceptional lengths to try and improve the lot for Colombia's less well off. One such person is the late Sam Ling Gibson. Sam, who tragically lost his life in a kayaking accident in Britain last year at the young age of 35, was one of the main driving forces behind Casa Taller, a community project in the impoverished San Luis area on the outskirts of Bogotá. Joining us to tell us about Sam's charitable work and the steps now being taken to ensure his legacy lives on is one of his good friends, a fellow Englishman of Sam's and Bogotá resident Harry Tittensor. Harry, to use a sporting phrase, as I know Sam was quite the active type, there are those who talk a good game, but when it comes to playing it, they're found wanting. Sam, it seems, very much let his actions do the talking. For a sense of that, can you tell us what exactly he did at Casa Taller and how it all came about?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Brendan. So basically, when Sam got to Bogota, he was one of the members of the first wave of foreigners who arrived here in 2010. Obviously, there was plenty of foreign people here before, but when people really started coming to Colombia to live from Europe and the United States and Australia, etc., he came across, and the very first time I met him was in a party, and he was a guy that was just full of energy, and initially I didn't think anything special of him. I thought that he was just another fun-loving gringo who was here to have a good time and to enjoy what Colombia gives and what Colombia has in terms of traveling and in terms of carnivals, etc. But I quickly realized that he had a few more levels to him, and he was quite an impressive individual and quite inspiring in a lot of ways as well. Casa Taller was something important to him throughout his decade that he had in Bogota. It's a project that's up in San Luis, like you said, which is up in the mountains on the outskirts of Bogota. It's a very impoverished area. There's a lot of gangs up there, and they're to take the wrong path. Casa Taller does, with very little support, is it offers a safe space for young people. By safe space, I mean a place where they can come, they can be part of a community, and it also offers things like workshops, whether it be carpentry, art, English lessons, cooking lessons, or gardening, for example. And this all works around the principles of empowering them, giving the kids a sense of community, like I said before, and a sense of teamwork, and an alternative direction to the direction a lot of young people have fallen into in that part of Bogota.
I take it that he didn't know about Casa Taller when he first came to Colombia, but it seems that he was the kind of guy that obviously was attracted to this. So what was he doing initially when he came to Colombia?
So initially, he settled into Colombia. I mean, I think I didn't know him when he first got there. He was in Bogota for a good year before I arrived. So I think initially, like most of us, or most of us are still trying to do, Brendan, trying to establish yourself in the city, trying to become self-sufficient. So, I mean, he's a teacher by trade.
Okay.
He also studied that. So the first job that he got here was as a teacher, but in one of the lesser known institutions, which is quite a usual path that a lot of people who arrive in Colombia take. But then, through time, he started working for more institutions. At the end of his time, one of the head lecturers and a teacher trainer as well. So, he started off right on the bottom rung of teaching, and he managed to move his way up to the oldest university in Colombia, which is quite a move. And amongst all of that, he wasn't only teaching and working at Casa Taller, he also was working within projects that helped with the reintegration of ex-combatants into Colombian society. So as we know, Colombia is an incredibly polarized country, and part of the peace accord that was negotiated and signed in 2016 was the reintegration of ex-combatants into Colombian society. So he would take part in a number of workshops with those people coming back to Bogotá to give them skills that would be useful for them coming back into Colombian society. So that was another major passion of his.
I think you ended up living with him, is that correct? Because am I right in saying that he then studied a master's here, which involved all of that? Because peace and reconciliation seems a big theme throughout his time here. So he always gravitated towards that. And if I'm right in saying that he had no problem bringing some of these ex-combatants back to the house that he lived in, that you shared with him as well, is that true?
Yeah, well, certainly in recent years, as he got deeper and deeper into those projects, it wasn't uncommon for me to arrive back at the house after a day's work to see him having a cup of tea with a couple of ex-combatants, which I have to say the first time took me back a little bit, but I gradually got used to it. And I mean, I would say 80% of the ex-combatants who were involved in his projects were actually women, and some of their stories were quite incredible, really. And also some of the struggles that they were facing to find a job and to take the right path in Bogotá came across as being very, very complicated. So, I mean, he was doing a lot of very, very important work with them. He certainly went a different path to me because, I mean, we were studying the same masters, but I was a little bit more focused on land reform. So I ended up interviewing and talking to the likes of the head of Corrigan, Jose Lafari, and the vice, and who is currently the vice president, Marta Lucia Ramirez. So yeah, we were associating with very different types of people in the last couple of years. That's for sure. Yeah,
different rungs of the ladder completely. Yeah, very, very interesting. And so his master's was in what exactly?
The title of the master's was Global Diplomacy and Conflict Resolution. And it was actually a master's that he took at the University of London, SOAS. So it was a distance course, which involved a couple of modules in London. So he had to travel back during his vacations. So he did a couple of diplomas he did one at Universidad Nacional, and he did another one at Andes. And they were basically focusing on the psychology of ex-combatants coming back into society. So they were very much focused on what he studied as a master's, but he wanted to study the diplomas in Colombia for more of a Colombian context, shall we say.
Would I be right in saying then that his kind of political ideology, or on the spectrum, he would have been more left than right in any case? Because I think it's the first time I ever met Sam, and then after that we met at a few parties, as was both of our wants, I guess. But was when Martin McGuinness, of course, the former IRA operative who went on to have a significant role in Northern Ireland government as the Deputy First Minister, but he was here giving a talk about that transition from conflict to peace in Los Andes University. I think it was in 2014, and I met Sam there. So I guess he was probably pretty chuffed to meet Martin McGuinness, and he was obviously dealing with ex-combatants here as well, to kind of see what the future could lie in store for ex-combatants here and play a role in Colombian government.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So I don't think it was so much him, agreeing with everything that Martin McGuinness has done in his life, but more, part of a peace agreement and part of negotiations is to talk to the other side, is to talk to what was previously your enemy, right? Because if you have peace negotiations, So I think, he found that part of it incredibly interesting, and certainly the peace talks with the IRA were a great example for Colombia, and certainly something that Colombia took a lot from. I mean, from what I heard, Santos was on the phone to Tony Blair every week discussing what was going on in the negotiations and looking for a bit of insight and what he experienced when he had his negotiations 20 years ago. So I think Sam did gain a lot from that. Certainly, he didn't get any negative feedback from the picture he put up on Facebook. I did. I don't think my grandma hasn't spoken to me since.
All right. Okay. Is that perhaps because both of your families are coming from different angles of this?
Not so much my parents, but certainly my grand's a bit of a royalist, so anything against. If I talk about Francis Drake being a pirate, she asks me if I'm on the right side. So she doesn't forget the past, that's for sure.
Okay. Just in terms of like your own relationship with Sam, I know once you got to know him better that you travelled quite a lot, and again to some of these camps, reintegration camps for ex-guerrillas and things like that as well. So you must have some nice memories of the time that you spent with him.
Yeah. I mean, I was taken by surprise a number of times. I mean, it would start off with the idea to go on a trip to Florencia in Caquetá. And, on the second day, all of a sudden, Sam would mention that he had organized something, which on one occasion did involve going to a demobilization camp. So, I mean, it was quite an experience. I mean, what we saw the majority of the time was that the government wasn't fulfilling what it had promised. I mean, you had the basic foundations of a camp there, but the other things that were promised, the halfway houses, the programs that they were supposedly going to go into didn't exist. So, I mean, it was the start of the implementation, but it hadn't been completed. And that probably had a lot to do with the change of government just 2 years into the peace accord being signed. But just a lot of people with hope when we went there. A lot of people hoping to return to society, but obviously because of what's happened since then, a lot of people have gone back in England, and a number have actually rearmed. I think the wait became too long in the end, and they couldn't sit it out any longer.
Of course, I mean it's a process, and as we know from the Northern Ireland example as well, it can take a lot of time, and there can be a lot of false dawns. But I guess at least if the process is moving in some direction, or moving at least hopefully forward, that we can get through these obstacles. But without, I suppose, getting too maybe political on that side of it, just coming back to Casa Taller, the thing with Sam is that, like, he seemed to live and breathe this, really, that it wasn't a case that he'd go there on his Saturday or whatever, but it was almost all consuming for him. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, whenever he would travel home to England, which he would always do once a year, he'd spend a lot of his time in England trying to fundraise for Casa Taller, to spread awareness. When he had holidays or when he had time available in Bogotá, he would also try and plan trips away with the kids at the foundation. So they would get taken on one such trip. He was particularly excited about. They went to the Amazon. On another trip, they went to Akira, and there would always be there'd be lots of practical activities involved in the trip. So on one such trip, when they went to Akira, it involved helping a indigenous community sort of build mud huts, and then post that there'll be lots of games, there'll be lots of activities. I remember on one particular trip when I went with him, it involved drinking a non-alcoholic chicha, I believe, at the end of the day's construction, and it didn't end too well for me. Everybody else seemed to be fine, but my next memory was waking up in my next destination, which was the following day. So I was going to leave them as a group in San Gil, on a park bench, feeling incredibly ill after not making it to my hostel that particular morning, because I'd been hit quite hard with whatever I drank that night. I'm not sure if they made chicha in that particular community the old way, out of saliva, but it's quite possible, I think. And
it didn't agree with you anyway, no?
my stomach's a little more fragile than theirs, obviously. So yeah, it didn't quite agree with me. And And then, yeah, you say that he took it with him everywhere. I mean, so the few weekends where he didn't make it up there and he didn't help at the foundation with his workshops and whatever he was doing, the kids would always know where he was going. So on one such occasion, he went to the Feria de Cometas, the kite festival in Via de Leyva.
Mm-hmm.
And at this kite festival, there's a big competition where all the best kite flyers from Colombia come once a year. It's in the first couple of weeks of August, and the kids very very nicely and in a very self-sufficient and sustainable way built Sam a kite. Well, what they thought was a kite. It was basically built from a couple of branches and a bit of tarp. So they're very excited to give this to Sam, and he promised the kids that he would fly it in the main plaza with all the other kite champions. So he spent much of the first day there just trying to fly the kite at some of the higher points of the town, trying to catch a bit of wind, but just wouldn't fly. So he decided to go and see an expert that evening, and the look on the expert's face, this guy had finished first in the tournament 2 of the previous 3 years, was just astonishment that this foreign guy could believe that this kite ever was going to fly in the air. It was just in complete disagreement. So, I mean, Sam at that point gave up, and he accepted that he wasn't going to be able to fulfill the wish of the kids at Casa Taller. Anyway, the next day when they were having the official competition, about 1 hour in, we were on the plaza, and on the tannoy, echoing, reverberating across the plaza, we hear Sam Gibson. And unbeknown to Sam, he had been entered by one of his cheeky friends into the competition. And yeah, the look on his face. I mean, this is a guy who normally grabbed life by the horns, but on this particular occasion, he disappeared into thin air for the next 3 hours, and we didn't see him again. So unfortunately, the town never got to see such a fantastic contraption in the air. But yeah,
this piece of lead almost as aerodynamic as a piece of lead.
Yeah, basically flying a couple of branches. But yeah, he really did take Casa Taller with him everywhere. It was really important to him. I mean, it is a really important project. The kids who go there are very vulnerable, like I said before. A lot of them are from very difficult backgrounds. There might be a bit of violence in their family. There might be, in a couple of cases, the parents aren't there. So it really does offer, another space where not only they can go and do these practical skills, they can be part of the community, but also, they get mentors. And Sam certainly was a mentor for a lot of these children, and it meant a hell of a lot to him, and they knew that as well. So it really was a big loss for them when he wasn't here anymore. He was a big hole, because not only did he go to the foundation, he also took other foreigners with him. So he brought me along, for example. He brought countless friends along there. In fact, one of the first things that he would say to any new friend is, "Come with me to Casa Taller." In fact, it was a litmus test for a lot of for not a lot. I won't say a lot, because that'll make him sound like a bit of a player. But for a couple of girlfriends, it was a litmus test at the start of the relationship. Can you cope with a day up at the foundation from 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday to 12 o'clock? How do you cope in these circumstances? And that would be the litmus test to see if he would go forward with the girl into the future. Most of the time. The kids are very lovable, so.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, there was a huge sense of loss then in Casa Taller with Sam's passing, because were there kids there basically from the time he started there, so he had them all this time, that he basically probably became like a big brother to some of these kids? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, so much so that, some of the kids that he started with back in 2009 are adults now, and they're actually working as mentors at the foundation. So it's a very transitional project where you have these kids who start off benefiting from the foundation itself, and they sort of continue working there, not all the time, but when they can, into adult life, because they know the benefits that it gave them when they were younger. And that really is good for the local community. You know, it's not a question of, okay, I'm going to go here while I'm young. People really do stay connected to the project because it is a community, also when they're an adult, you know. So, and then there's a couple of people who are adults now, and they have their own children, and their children also go to Casa Taller. So it really is a community there. I mentioned briefly before, there's a number of obstacles. San Luis is in a very impoverished part of Bogotá. And because of that, these young people are very vulnerable because of gangs and bandas criminales that operate in that area. So, I mean, the foundation operates in a very fragile and unstable environment at times. They've received a number of threats in the past as well, whether they've been direct towards somebody who's working at the foundation or to one of the volunteers or to the family of the kids. So it really is impressive that they managed to operate in such a capacity and they've been so important to so many young people for so many years, despite operating in such an environment.
Yeah, and I know we're going to get on to the foundation or the trust that's been set up by the family and linked into Casa Taller and where people can support. But one thing is, I guess maybe if Sam is looking down, he'll agree. Like in terms of his charitable work, he probably did more charitable work on his little finger than I've done in my whole life. But if there was maybe one fault, if I can use that word, that he wasn't very good at publicizing his work compared maybe to some other people. They have a lot of show but very little substance. It was the opposite with Sam. He had a lot of substance but very little show. And I know his Instagram, for example, if he was going to use that as a promotional tool, that never really got off the ground. Just one photo. So he wasn't too well up on the old social media, it seems. No,
not at all. And I mean, if there's one criticism that you could potentially have, it's that because in his mind, he didn't want to look for recognition for what he was doing. He believed that charity was something that you do and you just do it. But having said that, had he sought more recognition, maybe more awareness would have arrived at the foundation, maybe more funding. You never know. But it's just how he was built and how he operated, and perhaps also because he put so much energy into the projects that he was doing, whether that be teaching, whether that be working with the reintegration of guerrillas, or whether that was working in Casa Taller, or whether that was socializing and partying at the weekend, because he certainly did that as well. I don't think he really had time for Instagram. I mean, we all know the amount of procrastination that goes into maintaining a healthy social media presence. So
exactly.
So I think a lot of that was just avoiding it. And as far as Instagram is concerned, the only reason he even has an account was because he did a project with his students at Rosario, and part of that project was the students having outreach programs through social media. So I think he set up the account just as an example for the students. And obviously it was just a picture of him and Dennis Marcos, the former progressive mayor of Bogotá. Obviously, it wouldn't be a picture of him in Peñalosa or anything like that. It's just a picture of those two, and maybe that was quite apt in the end. Those two had a couple of things in common, like strange strategies to try and create change in society. Maybe they both had that in common.
And like talking about some of his other hobbies as well, of course, he did leave some physical marks on the city. I think unfortunately now I think they're gone, but he was into graffiti too. That was
so I mean, he used to have a partner in crime in that. So if anyone's ever been on the old Bogotá graffiti tour, the guy who runs that is a friend of ours who's here. He's not here anymore, but he was previously here for quite a few years. So he ran that, but he was also a graffiti artist, and I think Sam saw what he was doing and had a bit of an artistic turn himself. So he got Crisp is his artistic tag, the tour owner. He got Crisp to show him how to stencil, and obviously Sam was very politically influenced, so he did a number of murals around the city that sort of illustrated his political beliefs. One was, I think there were two that stood out. There was one on the 53 on September, which was Somos una Mezcla, which is a picture of Santos and a indigenous girl. And there was another one which was riot police with kisses all over. So Sam would have been very well suited to the public universities in Bogotá had he studied in Bogotá. I think that was his place. That would have naturally been his place originally.
I'm sure he probably would have got some energy out of the happenings here last November when we had the massive protests and things like that. That maybe it was a move in some sort of a right direction.
Yeah, he was very much a part. He was very much a part of those mixes. If there was a peace rally, or if there was a protest against corruption, I wouldn't see him in the house that night. Let's put it that way. I'd see him coming back on his rickety bike later on in the night.
And I know apparently this was it last year or this year was going to be his last year here, but a lot of people were saying that was impossible. That he was kind of already he was here for the long haul.
Yeah, I mean he'd really invested so much time in what he was doing, especially in recent years. I mean he lost a lot. I mean he said to me that he became less encouraged with the current government, but I think in the end, he just used that to inspire himself even more, because he realised that it was even more necessary that he stayed here for more time. So, I mean, yeah, he always came out with the old 2 years, I'll be gone. I've got another country in me. But you know, he never said firmly that I'm going to go to this place in 2 years. So, I wouldn't have been surprised if he never left, really, as long as he could visit. The UK once a year to see his family and to see his friends there. I think he was always going to be content here, to be honest.
Yeah, and of course, the kind of nice move on to his family, because I know his mother and brother came here last November, and that was kind of the push then to get the Sam Ling Gibson Trust set up, and there's a website that people can visit. So tell us a little bit about that, and this is, I guess, where we're talking about the legacy now and the positive legacy that we can build on.
Yeah, so, I mean, strangely, because Sam met the whole of my family. He went to my sister's wedding, he's met my brother. I never met his mum face to face, despite having lived with Sam for 3 years, until she actually came out here once he had passed away. So she's Sam's twin, basically. They're the same person. She's also worked in these types of projects her whole life. And for her, I think, for her process of not getting over, but for her process of grief, it was very important that Sam had a legacy here in Colombia that was long term. So she set up her trust in the UK called the Sam Ling Gibson Trust. And the idea of that is it has 3 pillars, basically. One is fundraising, which is the principal pillar, obviously. One is volunteering, so to spread the network of volunteers that may come to Colombia or come from within Colombia to help the project in the future with appropriate skills that can help the young people within the foundation. And the other one was succession, because at the moment there are 2 people running Casa Taller, Nicolasa and her husband Mateo, and they've been here for the whole time. But I think their plan for my young family is to eventually leave Colombia. So it was very important for Sam's mum and her family to make sure that there is a succession set up, so that there is something in place to ensure that this foundation continues to provide the resources, to provide the support, to provide the love that it has done to that community going forward. So that's in place, and as a result of that they came across here to get to know the project. Sam's mum's worked in a bunch of NGOs in the past to analyse what it needed, where it needed funding, etc. So that they now have this plan in place, obviously still with Nicolasa, not taking the reins from Nicolasa or Mateo at all. They still have the reins because they know they're the people who have worked there for over a decade and they know exactly what it needs. But just to give them a bit more support, because the foundation itself isn't an official charity, because they don't see advantage. They don't see any advantage in becoming an official charity. All that would mean would be it would be very costly to gain that standardization, and it would also mean lots more interference from the state, which up until now has provided no support to this local community. So they don't see any reason to involve the state going forward. That seems to be their reasoning. So one of the first fundraising events that was put in place was the run between Black Mill, where Sam grew up, and Bogotá, which is about just over 5,000 miles, 7,000 kilometers. And the idea was to run, cycle, and walk between Black Mill and Bogotá. And for every mile that people did that, they would get £1 in fundraising from whatever support they were getting. And in the end, I mean, Sam still holds such good faith with the circles that he had when he was with us. They got so many volunteers to do this that they decided to double the estimation of what they were going to raise. So they did it. And in fact, at the end of the fundraising, they raised about 3 times that. So it really does show the impression that he left on a number of people. And, even though he's not here anymore, he's getting us to do something, he's getting us to give something back to the community whilst improving our health as well, which I think during quarantine has been quite necessary for a number of people.
Well, yeah, exactly. Piling on the pounds during this lockdown, indeed. So that was a case that, so people had to run every mile, was it? Or how exactly did that work again? Like, so to cover the distance, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, so to cover the distance, but because there were so many people volunteering in the end, they decided to do the distance between Black Mill, which is near Gateshead in Newcastle, and Bogotá. Okay. They would do it there and back again, which is over 10,000 miles. But in fact, I mean, so many people just started donating money because obviously everybody was doing what Sam didn't do quite often, which was using their social media to spread the word. Lots of people jumped on board, and even myself, when I did it, people jumping out of the woodwork who had very brief relationships with Sam. They might have met him a few times. He left a lasting impression on them. So, I mean, to anybody who's listening to this podcast, and I mean, if you don't think that I've explained what he did well enough, just go to the site, and there's lots of information. And he really was an inspirational character.
Yeah, just to repeat, went out a little bit the connection, but Sam Ling Gibson Trust.
Yeah,
.org. Yeah, so you can find all the information there. That event, which is every July, which is in the anniversary of his passing, am I right in saying that's going to be an annual event?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we might get a bit more creative than what we do with that. This year it was largely his friends. I think he has a very close-knit network still back home. So they largely organised that this year. We got wind of it and we decided that, his friends from Bogotá would also participate. So I guess we'll try and think of other ways that we can raise money next year. And maybe think of a different way that we can do that. But yeah, I think that's the plan. Every July on the anniversary, we will do something during that month to raise money for the foundation. Because as I said before, at the moment, the only donations that they get are private donations from individuals or from local business owners. But obviously, with what's going on at the moment because of the pandemic, donations are slim. They obviously get no support from the state. So, the more people who can support this foundation, whether it's through money or whether it's through being able to volunteer, I mean, you don't even have to have a practical skill. It's just being there and being available to be a mentor to, a couple of these kids once in a while. It doesn't have to be every weekend, but it really does make a difference just to be there. And you see that when you visit, like the kids' eyes light up when they meet new people. They just want to talk to you. I mean, to them, all that they know is their local community up in San Luis. So to meet somebody from another part of Colombia or from another part of Bogotá or a foreigner is is a really important experience for them, and they're just full of questions, really, and intrigue.
Yeah, at the moment, I take it it's not, the workshops aren't taking place with the lockdown measures.
Yeah. So you still have, like I said, you still have the volunteers who are within the community. So the people, a lot of the volunteers are people who were previously part of Casa Taller, but they're also still contributing to the project because they still live in the area. But yeah, just to continue on what I said before, whatever you can give, whether that's time, whether that's money, or resources as well. So to give clothes, to give gardening equipment, to give cooking equipment, anything that could really help with the workshops that they're giving up there, I mean, is a real help. They really do.
Okay.
And one of the activities that they do, as well as recycling, they have a really big philosophy towards self-sufficiency and sustainability. So they try and teach the kids how to upcycle things that they receive, or whether it's an old piece of clothing or whether it's an old piece of furniture. So anything that you have really is of use to them.
And I think that's probably a fitting place to finish, because Sam himself, I believe, a man after my own heart in some ways, he wasn't too much into fast fashion, certainly not in his early years anyway. So a pair of runners or trainers with holes in them or whatever, he'd keep on using them. Yeah.
I mean, he certainly, as you know, Colombia is quite a formal environment when you work in its major institutions. So once he did get the job at Rosario and Universidad AN as well as shirt and tie. But yeah, his home clothes, his casual clothes, still were the clothes that he had in 2010. He had no intention of getting rid of any of those just yet. And the sewing shop was just around the corner. Were always of great use to him to make sure that he could get the full use out of his wardrobe.
Exactly. If it's not broken, don't fix it, I guess is the motto to take from that.
Practice what you preach.
Practice what you preach. We've been battling a dodgy enough line. Maybe that's Sam playing games on us and saying, "God, I don't want this publicity." I'm gonna obviously include the link to the trust on the text accompanying this podcast, so people can click that. There'll be a hyperlink and they can go directly and check out exactly what we've been talking about. It's only really been a glance over a man who's over a decade involved in Bogotá and in this country, so he's going to leave a long legacy, and hopefully that trust will get all the support it deserves. Harry, appreciate you taking the time, and as I said, we've been battling a dodgy enough line. The internet never the best here in Bogotá when you want it to be. But thanks a million for taking the time. If you do want to get in contact with me, of course you can via the Twitter handle at WA Corrigan, or via my Facebook blog, which is at Wrong Way Corrigan blog. But until the next time, ciao ciao.